The Case for Eternal Vigilance, presented by Edward Harshman. Quote, "Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom," unquote, attributed to Thomas Jefferson. 1. Mutual and pension funds and why they are hazardous to the economy. 2. The myth of the perfect agent. 3. Why lobbying is always a danger sign. 4. The undisclosed accidental benefit of having many siblings. Mutual and pension funds and the accidental conspiracy. An example of how complacency is weakening our freedom. There are others. This is the one in economics. How some of what looks like conspiracy can be explained as an accidental side effect of simple capitalism. Capitalism assumes that people can and often do own debt of big corporations. This debt is usually referred to as bonds. It also assumes that people can and often do own fractions of the big corporations themselves. This ownership is usually referred to as stocks. Stocks and bonds can often be bought and sold freely without the direct involvement of the corporations that issued them. There is nothing wrong with owning part of a corporation or with having a corporation owe you money. But there can be something wrong with owning part of each of several corporations or having several corporations owe you money. The reason it's risky to economic freedom is not easy to understand. In fact, I have never seen this analysis anywhere else. Learn it, and you'll be ahead of the so-called experts. Here we go. Most owners of stocks and bonds diversify. They contrive to own stocks and bonds from many corporations. This practice is called diversification. Diversification is generally recommended for the benefit of individual investors. If a stockholder diversifies, holds stock in many corporations, then a drop in value of exactly one corporation will not seriously affect the total value of stocks that the stockholder owns. This reasoning assumes that not all corporations will lose value at the same time. This assumption is not always true. Some investments are riskier than others. The higher the risk of a stock, the more uncertain the value of a corporation is, the higher an expected rate of return a stockholder will want. That's why some investors will prefer a risky stock to a safer stock. The most likely return, though uncertain, is higher that way. It is understandable, therefore, for a stockholder to own stock in each of several somewhat risky corporations if their risks do not correlate with each other. Not all diversification of stock and bond ownership directly involves the stock and bond owners. Mutual funds and pension funds each manage the buying and selling of stocks for the benefit of several owners. Mutual funds take money from ordinary investors and invest it in a large collection of stocks and bonds for the benefit of the investors. Pension funds are similar to mutual funds in that they invest in a large collection of stocks and bonds. They differ in that the intent of the investment is to pay for pensions, not to directly benefit any owners. With diversification, most stock in popular corporations is owned by people or organizations that also own stock in other corporations. Few or no stockholders in such a corporation care only for the one corporation's profit. The stockholders care for the total profit from their stock in all corporations. They won't mind if one corporation in which they own stock does poorly, if whatever induced the poor performance of that corporation is offset by very good performance of other corporations in which they own stock. As long as they get paid, they don't care who pays them. This analysis shows why there is and has been so little antagonism toward high healthcare costs among corporate managers, despite their having to pay such costs through employer-provided insurance. It is also a reason, not the only reason, for unions to resist lowering healthcare costs. Unions prefer high costs so that workers have a need to be rescued from them. Also, if union assets, welfare and pension funds, are invested partially in healthcare corporations, then a successful healthcare cost reform would damage their investments and make their funds lose value. Further evidence is available by looking at television programs. Cars, clothing, cosmetics, appliances, and electronics are among the many things advertised. Product placement, the process of sneaking mentions or use of specified products into television programs or movies, occurs. How to repair cars, sewing machines and how to make and repair clothing, how to repair appliances, and how to repair electronics or how to make do with allegedly obsolete electronic devices are not mentioned in mainstream movies and TV shows. Perhaps the clearest example is the Buy Me That series from HBO. It was a set of 3 presentations on how and why to be skeptical of advertisements. It was taken off the market despite being a very good series. No major corporation made a revised version of that series. It would be very popular with proper marketing. why does none exist? The effect of diversity in stock and bond ownership is that large corporations cooperate to maximize the total money spent by the consumer on items produced by those large corporations in total. This is not the same as each corporation trying to maximize its own earnings without regard to earnings of other corporations. One effect on the economy is reluctance to compete on price. Car makers tend to emphasize performance and size rather than price. Another is resistance to technological improvement that would render obsolete a popular thing that consumers already buy. Missing from what consumers can easily buy: diamond-age razor blades, which would last a lifetime instead of only less than a week. Flying cars, the technology has existed for decades, but road builders would become far less necessary. Instruction in school on how to appraise a potential boyfriend or girlfriend. If the problem of bad relationships gets reduced, then there are fewer people with major anxiety and depression, drug company revenue drops, and the same for mental health services. This effect resembles the hypothetical effect of a big conspiracy, but here is an explanation that is not a conspiracy. Suppose an investor owns equal values of stock in a car corporation and an airline, and the amount of travel people do does not vary with price. These corporations compete against each other to the extent that they provide transportation. Now suppose a major improvement in airplanes makes them safer and less costly, also that TSA reduces or ends its airport screening. What happens to the investor's stock? The drop in the cost to fly means less per-flight revenue to the airline. The airline can make up the difference with a higher number of persons flown, but in so doing it diverts people who would otherwise drive, assuming constant travel demand. Then total revenue to the corporations, a car and airplane, goes down, and our stockholder takes the loss. The stockholder would also lose if instead cars improved so that they could be operated with less cost and fewer people used air travel. What law would prevent this predicament? Such a law would repair competition, help the economy stop acting as if a conspiracy is at work, not violate our rights under the Constitution, and make us more prosperous on average by preventing distortions caused by interlocking ownership. Answer: ownership covenants. Make legal and enforceable the right of a corporation to require its stockholders and possibly bondholders to have no ownership interest in any category of corporations or other businesses that it chooses. If you don't like the requirement, you can escape it easily by not owning stock in that corporation. That way, a corporation will not be restrained by stockholders who own stock in different industries that, in turn, will be harmed if the one corporation improves its profits. Effects of ownership covenants. Healthcare reform if corporations in other businesses ban cross-ownership so there remain few owners of healthcare corporations. With most voters not receiving benefit from healthcare stock, natural market forces can work unrestrained. Total revenue of all corporations can go down without loss of prosperity because competition can reduce corporate revenue without reducing consumer benefit. This means that the income statements of corporations will look a little worse, but the consumers will be happy, and prosperity therefore is not diminished. Corporate boards of directors become fully committed to their corporations. With no need to worry about loss of value of other corporations, they can all work more intensely and compete more intensely on behalf of the ones that they direct. Morale and effectiveness are likely to improve as corporate culture becomes, within each corporation, more focused on its own corporate profit and less sensitive about other corporations and their profits. How to enforce such a covenant? There is an accidental benefit. Dividends and sales proceeds are already found on income tax forms. Cross-checking income tax forms against formally filed ownership covenants would be easy. If major investors oppose the existence of such covenants, then they will fight against having the covenants enforced, which means they will fight against the federal income tax. An example of how complacency is weakening our freedom. We must oversee our investments personally. If we all entrust our investments to others, then the overall effect will be a preventable drain on our economy. Also, if there is an economic firewall between two or more major groups of investors, then there will be some assurance against an overall downturn because stocks in all groups will have to go down at the same time for different reasons by coincidence in order for there to be a recession or a depression. I define fragmented capitalism as the belief in and practice of capitalism in which it is legal, enforceable, and generally accepted that any for-profit organization, if of significant size, can require that all of its owners not have any ownership, direct or indirect, in specified organizations or in organizations that produce specified goods or services. Next part, the myth of the perfect agent. An agent is one person who represents another and has some decision-making authority from the person represented. Good agents exist. Perfect ones, except in a close family, do not. What are the causes of imperfection? What are the causes of agent imperfection? First, agents are distorted in favor of themselves. Second, agents with other clients sometimes cannot provide the best work for one client without thereby harming another client. Employment agents are in this predicament when a job applicant shows up and two clients would each benefit from him or her. Third, defensive reputation. This looks like pure self-interest. Not entirely. An agent with a good reputation is more credible when the client itself is accountable to someone else, the big boss, a higher up in the hiring organization, and the client wants protection from an angry big boss in case the agent makes an error or there is a bad outcome. The fourth one applies to administrative lawyers more than others. What is it? Sacrifice of a client's best interest to earn and maintain goodwill from non-clients that the agent must work with. Administrative lawyers work with government officials, boards, and committees. If they do the best for one client, then the government people will be hostile to that lawyer thereafter. This is not totally unfair. If an agent has worked for very long, then his or her clients benefit from the agent's prior record of self-restraint with previous clients. In amicable settings, imperfect communication can lead to wrong assumptions that damage the outcome when a decision is made. Misunderstandings in families and such are very common. If you ever say to yourself about someone, "I thought he wanted this or that," then you are acting as his agent and you made a mistake. Planned surprises can be disappointing. The person who plans one is acting as an agent for whoever is to be surprised. What a client says he or she wants is not necessarily the same as what is wanted really. What people want is not necessarily totally rational. The process of explaining what is wanted can itself change what is wanted. Romance is an obvious example. So is the interaction between agent and client when the client has not carefully thought through what is really needed, perhaps insisting on a specific way to solve a problem, instead of accepting alternative ways to reach a solution. Emotional content in what the agent is asked to provide. Emotional content cannot be asked for directly. Voters who seek emotional satisfaction from politicians, particularly liberals, are very easy prey to this error. Inference. Gather facts as you wish, but make your own decisions. Interpret facts personally. Don't let anyone tell you how to vote, and don't let anyone give you opinions without giving you the facts from which they are derived so that you can check them yourself. Jury members are usually asked to trust this or that expert. The expert is an agent. For the best defense of freedom, jurors must learn the facts and reasoning directly, perhaps from an expert who testifies, and consider it critically and factually, not trusting it implicitly based on potentially irrelevant credentials. When you delegate a task, know what you are delegating and what constitutes a good job with that task, always. Next part. Why lobbying is always bad. Lobbying is the process of using paid presenters and consultants to persuade legislators or other politicians in power to alter laws and regulations for one's own benefit. It is obviously unnecessary if a new law helps some and does not harm anyone. A sane lawmaker would be easily convinced with a simple explanation. But what if a new law helps some people greatly and harms some people, but not as badly as the helped people are helped? There's an easy answer. Compensate the harmed people by making those who are helped pay enough to offset the harm completely. If those who are harmed are compensated fairly, then the harm is balanced out and no one gets hurt at all. No lobbying is necessary. Lobbying costs money. Why is it done? 3 reasons. First, a lawmaker may be mentally incompetent and cannot rationally interpret a fair argument for a new law. Second, a carefully designed pitch to a lawmaker may convince the lawmaker to adopt a law that is not harmful for the citizens. Harm exceeds good. Third, the lawmaker may be corrupt, an imperfect agent, conflict of interest, putting self ahead of client, and be susceptible to a direct or indirect bribe. If a law would cause more harm than good, a rational, honest lawmaker will oppose it, unless a lobbyist can override logical thought with an appeal to compassion or other emotions. Lobbyists can also show real or fake studies to lawmakers to show how a law will attract more voters than it repels. Ignoring land use rights is popular. If we paid fair compensation to the landowners, then the bill would be too expensive to pass. The proper response is true, which means the bill is too expensive, so vote against it. The big conclusion here: lobbying is always wrong. Simple explanation to lawmakers is legitimate, and we the people should always provide them frequently and vigorously. Delegating interpretation of facts to paid presenters is dangerous. Either there is a mentally incompetent lawmaker, or there was a careless or selfish lawmaker. That means you are going to approach the lawmakers yourself. Don't give the lobbyists a monopoly on citizen input. Next part: the accidental benefit of having many siblings. Many old stories exist about being born in a large family, in poverty, and working hard and becoming well off. Being one of several children when money is scarce is obviously a bad thing, in that whatever money is available must be divided among more rather than fewer people. With more people in the house where one lives, there is the advantage of learning from several people, not just a few. But there is another advantage supporting the theme of liberty. What is it? The only child or the child with few siblings receives a higher share of attention from parents than does the child with many older siblings. From birth, the child with many older siblings does not receive a degree of attention from parents that other children take for granted. As with learning foreign languages more easily as children than as adults, the death of brain cells makes permanent various thought processes, including those that call for dependence on or independence from other people for various mundane issues that most of us take for granted. Also, with many other children around, one child with a human relations issue or a personality disorder can be ignored by others. Those others have plenty of children to play with already, and the parents are busy with children too. What does this mean for the development of the child? Answer: the large family child learns an underlying sense of self-reliance. This is not the same independence that leads us to do various chores on our own. It goes deeper. Evidence: note that if there are twins or triplets, that fact does not lead to any special warnings to parents except beware the large workload. There is no suggestion of a mental dysfunction that correlates or seems caused by being one of several in a multiple birth. Major individual attention from parents, impractical in large families or when multiple births occur, does not seem to be required for a good upbringing. When parents have the option of spending much time with each individual child, something can go wrong. The problem is an unwanted side effect when parents of few children genuinely want them to be happy. From infancy onward, they sometimes react to their children's call for attention, including those forms of interaction that lead to a sense of self and a sense of when and how to interact with others. Parents of few children can take the time to listen to their children in detail, even when those details should be remanded right back to the children. Such details should be totally internal and not mentioned at all. Examples of such details that should be ignored: 1. A temporary feeling of being sad, one that will obviously disappear in a minute or two. 2. Being anxious about something when it becomes easier to mention the anxiety than to react decisively despite feeling uneasy, such as being teased and quickly teasing right back. 3. Running in a field while playing, then tripping and falling without actually being hurt, then the child will either receive feedback from adults from mentioning being startled, or will be ignored. The key point here: before they can consciously understand what is going on, babies and small children in small families learn to share concerns and feelings that are best left private. In larger families, they learn that minor disappointments or issues of temporary confusion cannot be solved by another, so they learn independence. This sense of independence regarding such matters does not exclude love and compassion. Physical therapists help their patients do things for themselves. Ideally, people will learn in infancy that some issues of feelings and how to interact with others are not interesting to anyone else. If learned early enough before bad habits develop, the spirit of being psychologically autonomous will be built into a child's personality, which is a good thing. This spirit of psychological autonomy is important for a child, later an adult, to have. Don't expect this analysis from the mental health profession. Its members are agents for their customers and are biased toward maximizing their own money. Otherwise, the child will learn the irreversible lesson that various issues are up for discussion with other people, friends, spouse, psychiatrists, crystal ball gazers, quacks, etc., when they should be built into the child's mindset. If people emerge from childhood with a need to turn toward others for things they should do themselves, then they are preventably dependent. Did the government contrive that situation? You decide. This reasoning does not prove that friends and loved ones are unimportant. They are. It is often appropriate to express feelings, even bad ones, to friends and family. If the trivial issues of self and awareness are banished from conscious thought and from all conversation, then they will not displace decisive forms of problem-solving and substantial expressions of love, compassion, and such. The loss of conscious access to details of one's thought process is, unless true mental illness is present, not missed. There must, however, always be an awareness that if someone has a personal problem, then the underlying responsibility to get it solved cannot be delegated. There is a difference between telling your parents about a meddlesome younger brother and indicating through rebellious behavior that you are unhappy. You should give those who hope to solve the problem something specific. If you think you have a problem and you ask someone else to help you with it, you are responsible for describing it fully. Whoever hopes to solve it will need to know all about it. Once again, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. The large family, lobbying, imperfect agent, and the hazard of mutual and pension funds. This is what freedom is supposed to feel like.